Hi, this is Kim from kimknighthealth.com, and in this video I want to talk about emotional abuse or verbal abuse. So often people can refer to this type of abuse as either verbal or emotional, and some people think they're very different things and some people think they're quite similar. So personally, I see that there is an overlap. So what is verbal abuse and what is emotional abuse? Well, verbal abuse is, as what it says, it's when somebody is verbally using words towards you which are abusive. And emotional abuse is that, but it also includes, although it is sort of the same thing, it's really about playing and toying and harming you emotionally. Okay, so it's like playing with your emotions and your feelings, trying to make you feel bad. It's not uplifting. So abuse is not positive, it is not kind treatment, it is not respectful, it is disrespectful. And the thing with verbal and emotional abuse, and I'm just going to refer to it as verbal abuse, is that it is very difficult to spot when we're actually on the receiving end, and there will be reasons for that which I'll go into. So what I want to do in this video is share signs of verbal abuse, in other words that you're being verbally abused or emotionally abused by somebody else, so that you can help to determine whether you are being emotionally, verbally abused, and then also share the signs of what goes on inside you when you're on the receiving end, because then what happens is certain things go on inside our mind and inside emotionally for us, which are a sign that we are being verbally or emotionally abused, but we're not quite sure whether we are or not. And this is the problem with abuse. It's very, very frustrating, and it's very insidious because we just don't know it's happening. So before I go into these signs, I just want to share a brief story from my life of when I was experiencing emotional and verbal abuse. And it took me quite a while to understand what was happening, which is why I want to share this so that you can maybe get some insights and clarification as to whether it is or it isn't happening. And most probably, if you're suspecting that it is or may be happening, then it probably is, because there can be a lot of doubt in the mind of the person that is being abused. So many years ago, I was in a relationship which initially I had no idea that it was what can be termed an abusive relationship. So there was verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and even some physical abuse. But it took me a few months to recognize and understand that what was happening to me was not okay. And the reason that I didn't know that to start off with was because I'd been used to some of that in my life already, and I didn't know that that wasn't okay. And usually this sort of behaviour gets set up in childhood, gets set up at an early age, and we don't know any different. It's just the norm for us. But just because it's the norm for us does not mean it's normal. So I was in this relationship, and to begin with, it wasn't abusive. I didn't feel comfortable in the relationship, but there wasn't abuse. But then at a certain point it began. And it was about 6 months into the relationship that it began. And this is also quite common, is that initially the person who is doing the abuse can be quite nice to start off with, and then at a certain point they change, they sort of turn, and their behaviour starts to change. So I was in this relationship, and he started to speak down to me, be mean to me. I can't even think of anything right now that comes to mind, but it was just lots of put downs, turning things around towards me. It was my fault, it was never his fault. and very subtle things that just sent my mind into confusion. And over a period of a few months, this just got worse and worse and worse. And I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. I wasn't sleeping, because one of the things that when we're going through this type of thing is that our body will be in so much stress and so much mental chaos and emotional turmoil that we just can't sleep. So I didn't sleep properly for about 6 months, and I was an absolute wreck. Because if you don't sleep, it's just terrible trying to, function. So I still didn't recognize what was happening. He was treating me a certain way. I kept on feeling, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. But then, maybe he's right. And this is one of the signs that goes on inside us, is the rationalization, rationalizing away the behaviour of the other person. And then I was in the library one day, and this book literally dropped into my hands, and I opened it up, and the chapter heading was called Jekyll and Hyde. And I thought, wow, that's what I'm always saying to myself. This person is like Jekyll and Hyde. 1 minute he's nice and the next minute he's not. And I started reading this book, and I thought, wow, this is my life. I'm reading my life in this book. And I got the book and I read it, and it explained so much to me. And it was the first thing that really started to open my eyes to the fact of, wow, this isn't right how I'm being treated. And actually this is termed verbal and emotional abuse. And from that moment on, I started to investigate and learn more and recognize and understand what was right and what wasn't right. And eventually, I won't go into the longer story now, but eventually I did extricate myself from that relationship. It wasn't easy to do, because often when we're in an abusive relationship, it's very sticky. There's a lot of sort of sticky energy that holds us together, and there's a lot of dysfunction. So rather than being a functional relationship, it's a dysfunctional relationship, and it's like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle locking into each other, and it's quite hard to pull ourselves apart. But eventually, if we want to stop being treated like that, we have to do something about it, and that may require walking away from the relationship, which is what I did. So anyway, I want to go through some of these signs of whether we're in an abusive relationship or not. So first of all, I'm going to go through what they will be doing or saying to you, so that you can maybe recognize some of these things. So there will be put downs. So for example, you may have just put your makeup on and put on your best dress and be feeling really good about yourself, and they'll make some comment that you look fat, or change your clothes, that looks horrible, some sort of put down. And then you'll go into doubt and believe them rather than yourself, and be sort of crushed inside. So there'll be put downs, and they might call you stupid. Lots of words like, well, you're stupid, or you're dumb, or you're a failure, or you'll never amount to anything, or just anything negative to put you down. The next thing is projection. So, for example, you may point out something to them that you might see needs changing, and they'll turn it around to you, or without you even pointing anything out, they'll be angry and they'll just dump their anger on you and then make it your fault. So what happens is, if we don't own our own stuff, we project it out onto other people. So we'll be constantly being on the receiving end of somebody else's unfinished, unsolved business. And they will turn things around. So you may say something to them, and then you may be talking about something that you want to talk about and saying that, hey, this is an issue that we need to discuss, and they will just turn it around and somehow make it your fault it's your problem, it's not their problem. So this is really common. They will be unkind and mean, which, overlaps with the put downs, but they just won't be nice. I remember once driving in the car with this person, and I'm a pretty good driver, but every time, actually it wasn't just once, this often happened, when we were driving, he would criticize how I drove. Oh, you're not driving close enough to the curb, and you don't turn left well, and you're doing this wrong, and you're doing that wrong. So just constant criticism over whatever I did. I mean, it could be you're making the beds wrong, you're cleaning the bathroom wrong, your cooking is not good, you don't look after the children well, you don't do your job well. I mean, it could be a multitude of things, but there will be criticism and judgment, and bringing you down about what it is that you're doing. Another thing is that it will always be about them. They won't be caring about your problems. You might start to talk to them about something that you're not happy about or that you're concerned with, and they'll just turn it around to what their problems are. They won't recognize and acknowledge and validate what you're trying to say. There won't be emotional support. They'll just turn it around and make it all about them and their problems, and they're the ones with the big problems, and you don't have problems, and they're more important than you, etc., etc. They may cross-examine you. So you may be having a discussion about something, and rather than it being a healthy discussion, they will start cross-examining you, so you feel like you're literally, stuck in a prison cell somewhere being interrogated by police, feeling like you have no rights, no say, feeling sort of crushed inside because you're being bombarded with all these questions. And another really common thing is this Jekyll and hiding, where one minute they'll be nice, or one day they'll be nice, and then the next day or the next minute they'll turn around and be this completely different personality, leaving you thinking, what is going on here? Because often this just comes out of the blue. You're just not expecting it at all. And what that means for you is that often you're on tenterhooks. You're walking on eggshells because you don't know when they're going to turn nasty again. You just don't know, so you've just got to be on guard all the time. And this relates very much, and all of this relates very much back to, whatever happened to us in the first 7 years of our life, what our family environment was like. Everything is programmed, if you like, in at that stage. It's programmed into our cells, whatever happens in our first few years of life. And then if we don't resolve what's happened to us and the trauma that we've experienced from that, then we go out into our adult life and we just recreate the same situations. They look different, but essentially they're just a repeat of what's happened in the past. So, yeah, you'll be walking around on tenterhooks, on eggshells, a lot of fear, a lot of unease, a lot of stress, never really feeling comfortable or at ease with this person. So those are the tips of how they may behave towards you. There's more that I could add, but that's just enough for now. Although I will add one more. One thing is that they may be really nice to you when you're out in public with other people, with your friends, with your family, but then as soon as you come home or you're just the two of you together, then they'll be mean and nasty and quite a different person. And then that can make it really hard to explain things to other people, to your friends and family, because when you try and tell them, hey, this person is being nasty to me, that they can't understand it because they've met this really lovely person who's been nice as pie, but you're experiencing something quite different at home. So as a result of all of this is going to create a lot of emotional and mental responses and physical responses inside you. So I want to go through what's going to happen for you if you're experiencing this verbal or emotional abuse, so that you can also clarify what's going on inside you, and really understand this situation better. So the first thing is we have a lot of confusion. When we're dealing with somebody who is changing their behavior, 1 minute they're nice, 1 minute they're not, you're going to go into confusion. And the reason for this is we know innately in our heart what is right behavior, what is correct, respectful, kind behavior and treatment. We know that. And we're programmed to know that through our 3 brains. So we have 3 brains in our body, and I have another video which you can watch that just goes through in depth these 3 brains. So I'll just mention it briefly here. But we have these 3 brains, and the head brain is to do with logical thinking, the heart is to do with feelings, and the gut is to do with safety and survival. So what happens is when somebody is emotionally or verbally abusive to us, our heart knows it's not right, it just knows it, and the gut also knows it's not right and potentially unsafe. But then what happens is the head brain challenges or questions whether it believes the heart and the gut. And the reason for that is because we have this confusion and doubt which has been with us our whole life, usually from early childhood, and we have stopped trusting ourselves. We've lost trust in ourselves. So we go into confusion because the 3 brains are not matching up. And in order for things to be right, all 3 brains have to be aligned. They have to be matched up. In other words, what is being said in the head, the heart and the gut brain has to match. Well, if we're not being treated well, which is not correct, nice behavior, our heart and our gut know that, but our head doubts and goes into confusion. And that creates more and more confusion and a lot of doubt. So we will doubt ourselves, we will doubt, is this right or not? And I remember I used to say to myself, this doesn't feel right, but he must be right, right? So I would rationalize away, and a rationalization is a rational lie. So we will rationalize away the behavior of the other person. So this self-doubt is a very clear indicator that emotional verbal abuse may be going on. Obviously, we can doubt about a lot of things in our life, and I'm only talking about the doubt that comes with the confusion over this person's behavior, right? We're going to doubt it, right? And we're going to try and talk ourselves out of the fact that actually we're right, right? And that will create a lot of fear. As I said, we'll be walking on eggshells a lot, and that will create a lot of overthinking. So we're going to get really stuck in our head because we don't trust what's going on in our heart and our gut. Everything is going to move up into the head, and we're just going to try and be constantly working things out with our head and trying to make sense of what is going on, and not making sense of it because we don't really understand it and we don't trust ourselves. And we don't trust that our heart and our gut are trying to guide us in the right direction to protect us emotionally, maybe even physically. And instead we put our trust and our faith in this person who is actually abusing us. We're obviously going to have a lot of hurt and sadness and grief, but we may not fully recognize it. The word recognize means to recognize, so we don't really fully recognize the hurt and the pain and the grief and the sadness. And the reason for that, again, is partly because of the confusion, partly because we're out of touch with ourselves, and also because of our programming from our past, where we were also unable to be fully in touch with our feelings because we didn't have enough support from other people to help us emotionally and help us to process our emotions. So this is a pattern which continues from childhood. But we will have hurt and sadness and grief from being treated unfairly by this person. And if we don't deal with these emotions, they're going to build up. They will build up, build up, build up, and then we can start to experience things like anxiety and depression. So anxiety and depression are what I call composite emotions. They're not just a plain emotion. They're a bunch of emotions. And anxiety and overwhelm is when we have too many other emotions inside of us which we're not dealing with. And depression is often the depressing or the suppressing of other emotions. So if we don't deal with individual emotions, they all compile together and we start to experience things like anxiety and depression. And we will also close our heart down. We will start to close our heart down because we just can't tolerate any more emotional pain. It is literally heart-crushing to be treated unfairly on an ongoing basis, and so our heart will start to energetically, obviously not physically, but energetically close down to protect ourselves. And that may be quite difficult to actually notice. That's not one of the things that we'll notice straight away or be aware of. We're going to be more aware of the emotions and the doubt and the fear, that sort of thing. And we will often feel quite shaken after we've had an interaction perhaps where the person has unexpectedly been verbally or emotionally abusive. We will be quite shocked and shaken and unsure of ourselves. And again, then we'll go into the overthinking and the doubt. And what can often happen is that we'll have an interaction where initially the gut feeling and the heart response, which is immediate, will say, this isn't right. It won't say that to us in words, it'll say in feelings. We'll have a gut feeling and we'll feel a certain emotion in our heart. And immediately we will know that that didn't feel right, that didn't feel good, that can't be right. And then afterwards, we will then go into the doubt and the rationalization and start making them right and us wrong. And then it just gets into a big mess inside our head. And for example, if we do stand up for ourselves and we do try and create boundaries and say no and protect ourselves and, and do what feels right, even if we do that and we know that it was the right thing to do, afterwards we can feel really quite shaky. It's really like we've literally been shaken, and then we go away afterwards, and even though there's a part of us that knows it was the right thing to do, there's another part of us that then goes into doubt and starts saying, oh, I shouldn't have said that, and now I'm going to have to go and apologize. And then that brings on the next thing, which is guilt. So we can have a lot of guilt over standing up for ourselves, speaking our truth, putting up boundaries. We can feel a lot of guilt. And again, that will be connected back to our childhood programming and whatever happened back then. But very common, so look out for the guilt. Nobody should ever have to feel guilty. There are two types of guilt. I have another video on that, real guilt, false guilt. Real guilt is when we've actually treated somebody badly, just like the person is usually treating us. If we treat somebody badly, we know it in our heart, because our heart knows that it doesn't like being on the receiving end of unfair treatment, and it also hates to treat other people unfairly. It makes the heart feel so uncomfortable. So if we've truly done something that we need to make amends for or apologize for, our heart will let us know. It will not be happy until we've done that. As soon as we have apologized or made amends, our heart will be clear again. And then we know that we're, back to harmony. But we will have a lot of guilt over speaking up for ourselves. So if you're in this type of relationship and you try and stand up for yourselves and you feel guilty afterwards, then that is a sign that there is an unfair treatment going on. And then what happens is, when we have this guilt thing going on, then we start to turn things on ourselves and we start to blame ourselves. And we start to think, oh, well, maybe it was my fault after all, and maybe I shouldn't have said that. And then we start to beat ourselves up. So it's a very common pattern for people who have grown up with abuse to turn things on themselves, because as a child can never make the adults around them wrong, because the child looks to the adults to look after their needs, their survival needs. And so they don't tend to make the adults around them wrong, even though it may not feel right how they're being treated. And so instead of making the other people wrong, if they are wrong, they turn it around on themselves and they make themselves wrong. And they think that they are to blame. So this pattern of the guilt and the blame and the beating oneself up starts at a very early age. And again, it's a very insidious pattern, because we're not often that aware that we're doing it, which is why I'm talking about it now, because one of the keys to transformation, or the first key, is awareness. Becoming aware of what we were previously unaware of. So for example, when I was in the library that day and that book literally fell into my hands and I started reading it and I took it home, and I literally had no idea that I was being abused and that the behaviour that I was experiencing was emotionally abusive. I had no idea. It was just what I was used to, and I didn't know how to manage it. So once I became aware that actually this wasn't fair treatment and that it wasn't right and that I shouldn't have to put up with it, my eyes were opened and I knew that I had a different choice. I now had a choice. Rather than being choiceless and unaware before, I was now aware and I had a choice. And the choice was whether I continue to put up with this behaviour and treatment, or whether I start putting up boundaries and saying no and not tolerating it anymore. So that's a question that you might like to ask yourself. What am I tolerating? What am I putting up with that is really making me uncomfortable, unhappy, sad, frustrated, afraid? And self-discover for yourself what you're tolerating, which perhaps you shouldn't be. So these are some of the signs and signals of verbal emotional abuse. I hope this has been useful. Please do comment below if there's space on your thoughts on this. It's a very, very important topic. As I said at the beginning, the first step is to become aware of what's going on, and then we can make changes. So I look forward to seeing you in another video. And just before I go, I'll just mention that I'm just launching my emotional alchemy training, which is all about how to self-process negative emotions. So all sorts of emotions like fear, anger, frustration, sadness, guilt, shame, betrayal, all these types of emotions that can get stuck inside of us and we may not even know are inside of us. This is a program to help clear all these types of emotions. And when we do that, we will start to experience what is already inside of us but previously hidden by these emotions. And what is already inside of us is peace, joy, love, happiness, respect, generosity, trust, openness, all the positive stuff. It's already inside of us. But if we have all the yucky stuff there that we don't want, until we clear that away, we can't experience all the good stuff. So I'll put a link to that as well underneath this video. So I hope this has been useful, and I'll see you again in another video.